to really take care of their health and their wellness so that they can continue doing the things that they love to do best, and they're not pouring from
Yes.
an empty cup.
Yes, absolutely. And that goes to parents as well. I think we forget that parenting is a huge job. And I think of fathers as well, but pouring from an empty cup and forgetting to take care of themselves.
Welcome to Mental Health Without Borders, the global wellness podcast with Dr. Lindsay Frey, where we dive into the complexities of mental health from a global perspective, exploring how different cultures approach wellness and what we can learn from one another. Whether you're a mental health professional, someone passionate about wellness, or just curious about the world's diverse approaches to mental well-being, this podcast offers valuable insights you will not want to miss. So let's get started. Today, we are joined by a special guest who will be sharing their unique insights on this topic. We are thrilled to have Karen Hurworth, a skilled counselor with a master's degree in counseling, joining us today. Hi, Karen.
Nice to be here. Really honored. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to have you. I will say that we already had met prior to today, so it's just really nice to have another conversation with you, because I felt like the first one flowed so well and I got to know a lot of really interesting things about your background. So thank you for that time also.
Absolutely.
So I saw that you are originally from the United States and then now you practice in Mumbai, India, and you work with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds, helping clients around the world navigate their mental health journeys. So can you tell me a little bit about your story and where you're from?
Sure. So I grew up in the Midwest and I started my career as a teacher. So that was back in the 1980s. So that really dates me, I know. But I began as a teacher and then I decided to go abroad and teach. So my first time abroad was to London. I taught in London. From there, I went to Switzerland and then back to the United States for a long time in Atlanta, Georgia. And I still consider that home. And from there, I went to Hong Kong, Beijing, China, Singapore, and now I'm in Mumbai.
Wow, that is fascinating that you've lived in so many unique places and you've taught in so many unique places as well.
Yes, I was teaching most of that time until I got to China. I might talk about that a little bit later, but all those years were in the classroom and also raising children, third culture children. So it's been really quite a ride.
Absolutely. Sounds fascinating to me. And when you say that you were teaching in school, were there specific grades that you were teaching or specific classes that you were focusing on?
I was an early childhood teacher. So I taught anywhere from pre-K, so 4 and 5-year-olds. And then the rest of my teaching years were mainly kindergarten and grade 2.
So pre-K and then kindergarten to grade 2?
Yes.
And so what were those experiences like teaching in different locations? Did you feel like that changed for you? Changes that went along either your approach or how you managed working in different cultures? Because I'm sure, and were you working with US-based kiddos or English-speaking kiddos, or were you working with kiddos from those regions?
Not always. So I worked in international schools and they were very diverse in their population. So people from all around the world. Some of the international schools up to 60 different nationalities.
Wow.
One of them being in Atlanta, Georgia, actually, that had one of the most diverse student populations, which people wouldn't think that would be the case in the United States, that you would have to go elsewhere to get that amount of diversity. So I had families and students from all around the world, but I taught in English.
Fantastic. And how does that work when they're coming from around the world? Do they speak different languages and have a translator in the classroom? How does that work?
They sometimes come not speaking any English, and that can be really tough on them. But the younger ones, especially, they learn very quickly. So, no translator, just really having them attend to visual cues and picking up what their peers are doing, watching them. And it's surprising, within 6 months, they can be proficient English speakers.
That is so fascinating. And I've always heard that as well, that if you
Mm,
are bilingual starting at a young age, that you do pick it up much quicker and it helps you later on in life.
it's
So
very
that's really
true.
fascinating. So then tell me about your journey from going to a primary school teacher to then a counselor and what inspired that change for you.
Sure. When I was choosing my career, like I said, in the 1980s, I really didn't know a whole lot about mental health counseling. It really wasn't spoken about much. So I chose teaching and I loved that career for nearly 3 decades. But it was in my time in the classroom that my passion for mental health grew. And I could see how important it was to remove those barriers of the social and emotional barriers around learning. And there's no way I could teach the curriculum unless those children felt safe and secure in their environment and in their relationships. And I began to really see how important peer relationships were, how those family dynamics were important, what was going on at home. My interest in mental health grew during that time. And my husband, I should mention, is an educator also. And we always worked in the same school when we were living abroad because there weren't many international schools in the city where we were working in or in the country. So we always, as a family, were in the same international school. And then he got promoted to be an administrator and then the head of the school. And I thought, okay, this is where I draw the line. I cannot have my husband be my boss. And so it wasn't as easy as him transferring to another school or me transferring. So that's when I decided I'm going to retrain. And I went back to school for a master's degree in counseling. So that was when we were living in Beijing 7 years ago. Ever since, really haven't looked back. The fulfillment of helping people find clarity and resilience keeps me deeply committed to what I do.
Oh, that's fascinating. And do you feel like those years in the classroom really help even now still to guide you when you're working with, like, say, children and adolescents? Do you feel like those experiences kind of come back up for you or help you?
Absolutely. Having knowledge around child development helps, and having worked with also with parents and families. And now a lot of the work I do is I work with teachers and I work with teacher burnout. So that is something I can really relate to, that because after my 28 years in the classroom, even though my husband getting promoted gave me the kick I needed to go do something else, I was really feeling that burnout in the classroom. So it's such an important profession, and I hate to see teachers burn out. And so a lot of my clients are teachers, and we work on avoiding burnout, how to prevent that so that they don't have to leave the classroom.
Absolutely. And that's such a great thing to talk about when we're talking about wellness. And so I'm sure there's a lot of times that you're talking with teachers about that and making
Mm,
sure that they're maintaining their wellness and their balance so that they can continue doing what they do love to do, because it is tough. It's really tough work. I've worked with some teachers as well, and I do
mm,
currently work at a school once a month nearby in with their ESE team, primarily with their exceptional student education team. And I see how much they care and how passionate they are, but they have a lot of demands on them. And so do the
yes.
kiddos. And they're just trying to do their best every day. And I'm sure you've heard this as well, but a lot of times we work best with people that we connect with on some kind of personal level if we have insight
Hmm.
ourselves. And so you're right. You're probably one of the best people to be able to work with them, being on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to be able to understand where they're coming from, to be able to relate to what's happening for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, working with people from so many different cultures, because you said you do work with people from varying cultures and backgrounds, how do you adjust your counseling style to fit each person's unique background? And do you shift that accordingly?
Yeah, therapy is heavily influenced by cultural norms. So, in some countries, therapy is widely accepted, while in others, there's still stigma attached to seeking help.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I've worked with quite a few young adults who have needed their parents' financial support to be able to attend therapy because they still might be in university, they don't have paying jobs, but they couldn't obtain that support because their parents were so against them getting the help they needed. And so in these cases, I've had to adjust my fee scale so that the client could pay out of their own pocket without having to forgo a few meals for the week in order to be able to seek the support they needed. And getting mental health support can be a very secretive action in some countries, especially I think Asia, where that stigma exists. And I had another client in China who was sadly, yet understandably, really fearful that if she received a diagnosis of bipolar personality disorder, the government would be alerted by the diagnosing clinician and she'd risk being put on a watch list. And that's real. And she was very fearful about coming to therapy for that reason. And in
Mm-hmm.
places such as China and India, there aren't many clinics to go to for counseling or therapy. So instead, people tend to go to the hospital if they have mental health issues. And therapists tend to be far and few between. Psychiatry is much more prevalent in
Mm-hmm.
countries like China and India. And I think some of that has to do with the financial gains around being a psychiatrist instead of a
Mm-hmm.
therapist and having that title. Yeah, I'd say in many parts of Asia where I've been living for 11 years now, awareness of the importance around mental health is still probably in the embryonic stages. There are exceptions, however, such as Singapore and Hong Kong, where therapy is very accessible and widely used.
That's really, really eye opening, very eye opening. And one reason why this podcast I feel like is so important for us to understand that there are still significant stigmas around the world when it comes to mental health and wellness. Yet
Mm-hmm.
I believe we struggle with it in a lot of different ways, regardless of our cultural background. And like you, I've worked with some clients from Asia, particularly, where it was a difficulty connecting for me personally, the parent and the child, and having them understand what their child's needs were around
Mm-hmm.
something like anxiety, for example. And so a lot of the work was really trying to help the parents understand what their child or adolescent was going through. I'm not sure if you've had any experiences like that where they do bring them in and maybe they're not 100% supportive of the process, but maybe they do reluctantly, but you're trying to help one of the family members or more understand what the adolescent or child's going through. Have you had that experience?
Oh, definitely. But in the classroom too, when I was teaching. Now I mainly work with adolescents and adults, but when I was a classroom teacher, that psychoeducation part was so important. Really, and in therapy, when I have worked with children, you have to really be careful that the parent doesn't become your client because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're really
Yes,
trying to support them through whatever their child is going through. And they sometimes require then seeing an individual therapist for themselves.
absolutely. So you would encourage them to do that.
Yes,
That's
definitely.
something I've definitely done in my work as well. When you feel like you're doing some parent training and it gets to a certain point, then it's completely okay for the parent to seek help. And sometimes that could be an avenue, just from my experience, for the parent to seek help is having their child or adolescent come in first and then feel more comfortable with the process. And then they might seek their own help for the very first time.
This is really true. Yeah. I've seen that
Mm-hmm.
too, where that works, where it gives them the help that they perhaps needed for a while and where there was too much stigma around seeking help.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering too, with working with clients from so many diverse backgrounds, what are some common struggles, or do you see common struggles that clients face, even though they're
Hmm.
coming from different parts of the world?
Yes, despite cultural differences, many clients struggle with similar core issues that I think they struggle with in the West. Self-worth, anxiety, relationship issues, and career stress. One emerging challenge is the impact of social media on mental health, and particularly among the younger generations. The pressure to curate a perfect life online can create deep feelings of inadequacy for the younger generation. So I'm really happy to see that some international schools in Asia are starting to adopt a no phone policy. And I don't know if that's something that's happening in the West as well, in the United States. Students need to check their phones in at the start of the day, and they get locked up actually in a little pouch. And then they get them back at the end of the day when they leave school. And schools are reporting that there's a significant positive impact on student mental health and learning because of this. That's one common struggle I see amongst especially adolescent girls. It seems to really affect adolescent girls more than boys. Boys are affected, but girls especially, with the whole curating the perfect life and comparing themselves to their peers.
That's very fascinating that's something I completely agree with you on, that I see here is the dependence on social media for self-worth, acceptance, their self-image. There's a lot of challenges with comparison, and this can give kiddos anxiety or make them feel left out if they're seeing other people do things that they're not included in. Whereas when I was younger, I grew up in the 80s, I didn't know if other people were doing things without me, and now they see it. And that can be really challenging. And so it's interesting that that is a global issue. And I know that it's become more of an issue over the last, I would say, 10 years or so, because I started doing counseling back in 2010. So there was about 5 years, I would say, or so, where it wasn't as big of an issue. So I'm kind of pre-social media to post-social media and my therapy journey. And I've seen that shift, unfortunately, and the detrimental effect that it can have on especially adolescents. And you're right, adolescent females are the ones that I see impacted the most. And so I, interestingly enough, saw an article just yesterday that said they are exploring banning cell phones. I'm from Florida in the United States. And so in Florida, that is something that they're looking to do. So they've put new restrictions this school year for different grades. So our elementary school, I don't remember 100% what their new policy was, but it was pretty much having it away the whole day, except for before and after school. And then middle school, they can only have it when their teachers say they can have it out. And high school has less restrictions, but they are considering a total ban where they would have to put it away, just like where you are coming from.
I'm so glad to hear that. It really makes sense. And it helps parents too. I think parents are often having this battle with their children about being on their devices. And if schools are taking a stance, it helps parents to take a stance. It helps parents to find commonality amongst one another so that their child's not left out on the outside. If they decide they don't want their child to have a cell phone until they're 16, the danger that if one parent says no, then their child risks being isolated. But if you get, say, a group of 10 parents together who all make that agreement, then the child has others like them.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it is one thing I've heard from parents over and over in therapy is that social pressure to have their child have a cell phone because of the other kiddos, even if they don't want it themselves, but they don't know which thing is going to be more impactful to the kiddo, having it or not having it. So that is a struggle for them, absolutely. And I fully agree that if the schools took a stand and kiddos aren't having it out, they're not comparing, and then they can go home and it wouldn't be as much of an issue if they took that stand. So I'm really happy to hear that, because that wasn't something that I knew was happening in certain areas, that they were banning it. I'm glad that we're waking up to that. Yes. And I hope that we can create big change. And I do think that that would help kiddos with their health and wellness. That's something that I'm very passionate about, of course, because I think it also keeps them in. It keeps them home. It keeps them on the device where they're not going outside as much. They're not getting together with people as much because you have this kind of faux socialization that's happening on the device. So why do I need to get together with people in person. And I
That's
think that
right.
that's a really big part of socialization as an adolescent or as a child, to be able to connect with people in person outside of
Oh,
school and work
definitely.
on building your social skills.
Yeah, it really has hijacked childhood, hasn't it? These
I
devices
agree.
and smartphones.
Yes. And so if they're doing that where you're working, I'm sure that probably helps you, even as a therapist, kind of assist that. Because where I'm talking about when there isn't boundaries, that sometimes is a part of our therapy process. When I'm talking to a parent who has a kid with anxiety and they're texting them during school to pick them up, and the parent's asking me, what do I do? And my
Hmm.
approach is we've got to say that that's not an option, because if it's an option, they'll utilize that option. So I know it's hard, but we can't have that be an option. So it
That's
does
right.
inform
Hmm.
even come into the therapy space. So I wanted to ask you, I was looking at your website, and it's so interesting because although we work in different countries and with different populations, one of your specialties is the same as mine, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So
Right.
it seems like some of the approaches are similar regardless of where you're practicing. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I think in the UK is especially big because, well, if, maybe in the West as well, because of insurance. It has a timeline, doesn't it? And
Yes.
it's much more efficient than, say, talk therapy is. But the same modalities. Acceptance commitment therapy is very popular in this side of the world, I think, because the proximity to Australia, where it originated, and somatic therapies, mindfulness, that all originated in the East. So those would be some other modalities or types of therapy I would practice.
That's so good to know, because I did not know that ACT was something that originated in Australia. That's really fascinating to me. I
Yes.
did not know that. Do you have a favorite approach or a go to approach, or do you just adjust accordingly as needed?
My go-to approach is acceptance commitment therapy. I do a lot of values-based work. And
Okay.
especially here, I have to say in Asia, a lot of time clients haven't been given that opportunity to think about what's important to them.
Mm,
In a collective society, they rarely consider what their values are
wow.
and how to create a meaningful life for themselves. So that is kind of an eye opener for them.
Absolutely. It must be such a brain shift to go from a collectivist mindset to what do I want for my life, and have that be okay, without
That's right.
guilt or shame.
Yes, that's what comes up often because they also value the parental relationship and they respect their parents and want to abide by their parents' wishes. And this can cause exactly what you said. If they start thinking about what they want for themselves and creating a life that's meaningful for them, then they see it as disobeying their parents or letting their parents down. And that causes that guilt that we have to work with. And I
Yes.
also have to keep in mind, I have to be culturally sensitive
Yes.
that this is a cultural norm that you respect your parents and you do as your parents say. But at the same time, helping them to consider what they value and perhaps set boundaries or learn how to communicate their needs.
That sounds really rewarding when you see that happen, when you start to see that mind shift happen.
Mm, it really is.
I would like to know, what is one of those things that you find most rewarding as a counselor?
I love hearing people's stories. I
Mm-hmm.
love hearing people's stories and relationship work, whether it be with significant partners or family members. I think relationships are at the root of our mental health. And if
Mm,
you have healthy relationships, you do tend to have a healthy well being. So that's what I'd say is my most rewarding work, helping people with their relationships.
That is very rewarding. I wonder too if you see differences and how kind of we handle relationships in the West and relationships are managed in the East. I think something that I would, just from working with diverse clients in the United States, I do see certain cultures doing a better job at community or doing a better job, maybe respecting their elders in their family. I don't know that I always see that so much here, but I wonder if you've seen some differences just coming from the US and being from the US and
I
working in other.
do. I think most impressive is how some Asian countries have integrated therapy into everyday life through community-based mental health initiatives. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, in Singapore and Hong Kong, there are parks with exercise equipment along the common pathways so that
Wow.
exercise is easily accessible and it doesn't require a gym membership. And you can see people of all ages using it at any time of day. And then just out in the open, they'll have ping pong tables, basketball courts,
Mm-hmm.
tennis and soccer courts that are also easily accessible for team sports. And these facilities are well maintained so that they can be enjoyed by everyone. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times in the US now, when I come back to visit, I see that the tennis courts are all overgrown with weeds, and they seem to have put a lot of effort into these community based health initiatives. And another thing is that I think a difference is that people in Asia tend to live in apartment buildings and high rise buildings with
Mm-hmm.
high density populations. So this lends itself to seeing your neighbors more than what you would do if you live in a large home with an acre of land in between the house next door. And so people, they have to find a way to get along in these high density populations where they're living in really close proximity of one another. And in Singapore, they're called HDBs, which stands for high density buildings. And they've actually designed the buildings so that when people leave their front door, they have to walk past other front doors and other people, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
communicate with each other and get to know their neighbors. So that's one thing. And it's not uncommon in Singapore for tenants of an apartment block to eat together, exercise, and celebrate together all outside in that common area that's provided to them. It's really something. Entire infrastructures around these apartment buildings. So you have restaurants and the grocery store, and it's all tends to be right next door or underneath the apartment buildings so that people have to come together. They even hold their funerals in these common areas out in the
Mm-hmm.
open. So when someone's grieving, when they're mourning their loved one, it's not just close to the family and close friends. People from all over who happen to walk past can come and be a part of that grieving. India and in Singapore, the elderly, they'll sit together talking on benches that face each other. So the building I'm living in right now, beautiful gardens outside, and it has benches set up in a square. And if I go walking around there at night, I often see all the elderly people sitting on the benches, singing together sometimes, definitely talking. And so I'd love to see more of those everyday community health initiatives in the West.
I think that that is a wonderful change that could happen. It's one of the things that I love about going to Europe is just the walkable cities, the access to more outside, the way that people connect and communicate with one another, even if they don't know each other. And so that's really fascinating to hear because I didn't know that they were set up that way, but I see how that would foster a closer community and then which could translate to community support, which could help
Mm-hmm.
people not be alone and could positively impact mental health for some people that may need that.
Absolutely.
And so I want to ask kind of the last question about mental health and then a couple wellness questions. But if you could change one thing, since you have so much experience with different cultures, if you could change one thing about mental health treatment on a global scale, what do you think that would be?
I would push for more affordable and accessible mental health services, especially in underserved communities. I think mental
Mm-hmm.
health should be prioritized as physical health with widespread
Mm-hmm.
insurance coverage and government support. Too
Mm-hmm.
often, people are going without support because it's not affordable to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
everyone deserves to be able to get the help that they need. Like you said, just like physical health, why does that sometimes tend to be easier than with mental health treatment or more accessible than mental health treatment when we all know how important that is to do the things we do, to keep us going, to do our jobs well, to be a good family member. So I completely agree with you that that's should be prioritized as well. And so a couple of questions about wellness. Do you see a difference? I think that is actually one big difference that you already said that can help people be well, a difference in how some of these other cultures approach wellness.
I think there's a more of a holistic approach. Yoga as well, especially here in India, being in tune with the body and present moment. Yoga helps with that a lot. And again, I know that's something that takes place in the West. Here in India, I think it goes to a completely different level. I've been to
Mm-hmm.
some of these hot yoga classes when I was living in Atlanta, where you are flying through the poses. You can't even get into a pose, and you're flying into another one, and the loud
Mm-hmm.
music is blaring, and it's very different over here. You hold your poses, and you are in tune with your posture and what your body is doing and making those adjustments and paying attention. Yeah, it's very different that way. I do see yoga as a mental health practice,
Mm.
definitely.
Well, now I just added something to my bucket list to take a yoga class, a
Oh,
hot
it's
yoga class, which I've never
fantastic.
tried. And so, with that, do you have a favorite personal wellness practice or a go to?
It's hard to choose just one. I have
Mm-hmm.
different practices for different reasons. So I am a big walker or hiker. So I brisk walk for clearing my mind and reducing stress. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I heard on one podcast, a therapist was saying if a client calls and they're really highly anxious, they'll be told, go for an hour walk and then call me after that walk. And almost
Mm-hmm.
always the anxiety has been reduced so much. So that's one thing I do for reducing anxiety and stress. I practice yoga for focusing on the present moment and tuning into my body. And I
Mm-hmm.
journal for untangling my thoughts. Someone once said, how do you know what you think unless you see what you write?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be so true. It just
Yeah.
helps me understand my thinking and untangling it. And it especially helps when I'm trying to find solutions to problems.
Yes, absolutely. In cognitive behavioral therapy, it's something that I really encourage early on as well. So I love
Hmm.
that you do that. But part of that is sometimes we have so many different competing thoughts in our mind at the same time that I find when you write them down, like you said, you can organize them better, you can see them better. And a lot of times you can create solutions right then and there just by seeing the nature of what's happening in your thoughts. So I love that you do that as a personal practice too. It's oftentimes something I do, particularly when I get stuck on something, is when I will pull
Hmm.
out my journal and start unraveling what's going on up there and seeing how I can create solutions for it. So those are really great practices. And as we talked about with burnout earlier, it's so important that we practice our own self-care and wellness, particularly as therapists, but anyone in any helping profession or any profession to really take care of their health and their wellness so that they can continue doing the things that they love to do best, and they're not pouring from
Yes.
an empty cup.
Yes,
So I find
absolutely.
that.
And that goes to parents as well. I think we forget that parenting is a huge job. And I think of fathers as well, but pouring from an empty cup and
Mhm.
forgetting to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I had that insight yesterday where, as parents, we are teaching our kiddos just norms that they're going to grow up with and patterns that we hope that they develop. And so, what are they seeing from us as parents? Are they
Hmm.
seeing a healthy, active, well rounded, well balanced individual? Or are they seeing somebody that's stressed out, overwhelmed, tired, and giving them kind of the leftover? And so it is so important as a parent as well. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I know that you have kiddos as well.
I
And
do.
so I'm sure that they have seen a lot of these practices that you do and hopefully incorporate them themselves too along the way.
Yes, they're starting to. Unfortunately, when they were being raised, I didn't know about any of this.
It wasn't as available or around, so I
That's
understand.
right. But now that's
Mhm.
one of the things I do love to do is work with parents and
Mhm.
especially new mothers.
Yes, that's fantastic. And so I have really enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on. My last question that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think makes you particularly stand out amongst other therapists?
I think the combination of having experience and that background in education,
Mm,
along with my counseling qualifications and skills, that could be a powerful combination because
yes,
I understand children and I know child development. And so that helps me in work I do with children and also adolescents. I also understand parents. Being a parent also, that helps. And having worked with parents of my students, and I think that it helps me be able to relate to that population. But also, since I've worked internationally, I think I come to the job with a lot of cultural awareness.
you do. You absolutely do. So that's
Well, thank
fascinating. And
you.
like you said, the work that you do with children and adolescents also guides your process with adults. So it's an
Hmm.
incredibly well rounded approach that you have. So I am grateful that you transitioned to being a counselor so that you can bring all of these insights to so many people, change so many lives, and make a huge difference. So thank you for what you do because I know it's not always easy, but it's incredibly important work. That's why I'm still doing it today. I love it. I'm passionate about it. And I like to talk with other professionals that are as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lindsay. I really enjoyed this conversation. It could have gone on
Yeah.
forever.
I know exactly. Just like the first talk, I think it went longer than expected,
Yes.
but thank you. And so I want to tell everyone that's listening, thank you for joining us on Mental Health Without Borders. Just remember, no matter where you are in the world and where you come from, your mental wellness truly matters. So be patient with yourself, take time for your well being, and never forget that seeking help is a sign of strength. No matter the challenge or distance, we are all in this together. So be kind to yourself. And I look forward to connecting with you next time on Mental Health Without Borders.